Hello, my name is Edgar de Anda with Benibra Pest Control in Westlaco, Texas, and I'm listening to the world's #1 pest control training podcast, the Pest Geek Podcast with Frank Hernandez.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your Pest Geek, here discussing all things pest. We want to remind our audience to join in on the revolution. That's right, join in on the conversation, be part of the society. Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we're on YouTube. We're on the web, pestgeekpodcast.com. Check out there the notes, everything that we put into the podcast. They're all on there. And now for today's topic. I've got Andrej Branc with Pelgar USA on the phone. Hey, Andrej, welcome to the podcast.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Frank.
Hey, yeah. So we chat a little bit. I guess we have a mutual friend in the industry, Jeff McGovern, the pest coach, and he put us together.
Yes.
He put us together so we could talk about your product because he and I are kind of on the same wavelength. We're kind of the same kind of geeky, when it comes to pest control, and a lot of stuff with exclusion and being as green as possible and not, doing very good IPM. So I think that's why we kind of get along and we see eye to eye on things. But tell me about, you work for Pelgar. I'm not very familiar, I got to be honest, with Pelgar, and I don't know how many people are. I've just have not used your products, and I have to be honest about that. So I'm coming into this very green because I'm not familiar with them. Except the one we were discussing, which we will get into. Tell us about Pelgar and what they do as a company and who they are.
Okay. Well, Pelgar, as a company globally, has been around for over 25 years. Primarily a rodenticides manufacturer based out of the UK. We're about 40 miles southwest of London. And it came out of two guys who used to work for ICI AstraZeneca, which later became Syngenta, developed a lot of rodenticide products there and then started their own company back in the UK. The Pelgar I work for, which is Pelgar USA, was born out of an acquisition. I had my own company called AB Bait years ago, which I started in 2009. And 2 years ago, Pelgar bought me and my brand name of products out, and I went to work for them. But they had always been the manufacturer that was providing the rodenticides that we were bringing into the U.S. since 2010.
Okay.
So that's how I became a part of Pelgar. They had made our formulations for us in the U.S., and rodenticides is still primarily what we do, although we have, through acquisitions and a lot of research gotten into the insecticides and herbicides end of markets as well in Europe and other places. But in the U.S., our strengths are soft bait, blocks, and now the Rodent Stop product.
Gotcha.
For myself, I got into the industry as a registration guy. It was back in 2006. I worked for the company that was the first to introduce soft bait to the market.
Okay.
So a product before the first strike days, but it was I spent a lot of time working with the EPA to make pasta bait, soft bait a viable market, and then I decided to stay in there. I really liked the industry and decided to stay. Started my own company when and work out on the other end.
And how did you actually get involved in the pest control market? I mean, how did you get in the industry? Tell us a little bit about your background, your education, where you come from, because a lot of people get into pest control in very strange ways. We keep finding this, so I'm kind of curious how you actually got into pest control, or in this case, the rodenticide market.
Yeah, mine is definitely a strange way to get in. I mean, I was working for a chemical importer at the time, and we had a lot of success, but we were looking for, it was good times. We were looking for new possibilities, new markets, and a guy I had known who switched companies over in Europe contacted me and said, I think this product's interesting. And we said, well, we deal with oil and gas chemicals, and you're asking us to go into rodenticides, and I knew nothing about it, and I was the lucky pick by the boss and said, well, this is now your baby, run with it. So I spent a couple years figuring out what it was. We had the testing done, and then I spent some time getting the EPA to realize that pasta bait, soft bait, was actually a viable product. And so I got into the industry like that, and eventually it took up so much of my time that it was the only thing I did. And when things at the company didn't go well, then all of a sudden I had no other job. So
Wow. Then you mentioned you had to deal with the EPA and convince them that there was a viable product. What was the challenge of bringing a product like a soft bait versus a traditional block bait to the market? What's the big challenge there? I mean, what was the whole hurdle? And
well, I mean, for soft, I don't know how much you know about the history of soft, but it's actually called pasta bait in Europe.
Okay.
Simple reason, it basically evolved from pasta dough. I mean, at its simplest form, but it's been around Europe for a long time, and there were some similar products in the U.S. over the years. None of them really made it. A lot of them had concerns as far as secondary poisoning and kids getting into the product. I mean, the biggest concern from the EPA side, when we started looking at registration, we started having those meetings with them, because obviously at the time it was a completely new product to the market, was one, the name. We were not allowed to call it pasta bait because it sounded like a food.
Gotcha.
Which is why we came up with the names, or rather I came up with the name soft bait. And then the second part was the packaging. I mean, if you look at any of the soft baits out there, they're all in little paper packs, and they kind of look like bubble gum. And that was also a concern. Now, the denatonium benzoate, which is commonly known as Bitrex, the bittering agent that is in all baits basically at this point, kind of alleviates those concerns. But that was the big issue was basically how it looked like and what it sounded like. It didn't sound like a rodenticide. You know, it wasn't Radex or something like that. It was, it was pasta bait. Yeah. What else could you think of besides food?
Right. So this is basically a product made from the same thing that you make pasta from, the same dough type of material. So it doesn't have the wax in it?
Yeah, I mean, in its basic recipe years ago, I mean, we're talking about 40, 50, 60 years ago when this stuff was first invented in Europe. But yeah, it's basically, I mean, dough, water, some salt, that's your basic start. Now the recipes, obviously, I mean, there's 50, 60 different formulas, recipes for soft bait out there at this point worldwide, but much more evolved. And I can only speak to the recipe that we helped put together in the U.S. and that Brigand is made of, and that has some flavorings in there that are synthetic and synthetic peanut and stuff like that, and it's also got some corn flour and stuff like that. So you try to evolve with the changing tastes of the rodents as well. A lot of research goes into baits. That was the biggest thing I found, going from chemicals to baits. Chemicals are simple. It's just one thing. You need it to manufacture something else. Baits are a whole different ball of wax.
Gotcha. So you originally you studied overseas. You don't have a degree here in this country, because I'm looking at your bio, what you sent me, and you studied what, international business, or what exactly did you? Because I think you went in Switzerland.
I actually started. I was a finance major coming out of Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania,
okay.
And then I went into that, and I quickly realized that I had picked the wrong major. I was a sales guy at heart. I liked talking to people. I liked developing leads, contacts, business. I didn't want to sit in an office looking at numbers all day. So I went to an international business school in Switzerland, and that's where I got a degree in international commerce.
Wow! And all the way in Switzerland. What made you choose to go to Switzerland? I mean, what was the?
There was good skiing.
Good skiing. Yeah, you got to make sure you're.
There were other things besides that, but that when I was looking at grad schools to get an MBA, I won't lie, that had some factor to it. The school was really good. I wanted a very international experience. I mean, coming out of the East Coast in the U.S., a lot of very similar people. I wanted to be out of my comfort zone a little bit.
Gotcha.
Whether it's language-wise or people-wise, I wanted an experience.
So did you learn the Swiss language when you were over there, or was it in English?
I learned Swiss French, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. So, and because I know you were traveling, and when I talked to you a couple of, it must have been almost a month ago, you were actually going overseas. So, do you do a lot of traveling to the UK or over there? Because I want to lead some.
Yeah, questions. I do. I spend a bit of time in the UK. I also cover. I mean, at this point for Pelgar, I cover both Americas. So I'm the business manager for North and South America. So. Okay. I think when I talked to you last, I was on my way to Argentina for a conference, for a pest conference down there. So
okay, so you're because I'm really curious. I don't have a lot of contacts over in Europe, but I follow what's going on in Europe, and how I from what I read, and help me out here and help the audience out. When I read about what's going on in Europe and with the rodenticides and the new rodenticide laws, and the associations that are over there, the pest control over there, from my feeling, looking at it from what they call us across the pond, is that it's way more advanced, I think, in IPM and eco-friendly than a lot of the guys are getting into eco-friendly and IPM over here. And it seems like they are way more advanced than we are in that aspect in Europe. Is that a good observation, or is what are you seeing in as far as the major differences between doing pest control in the U.S. and I know then we'll get into South America because I got some people that I talked to in Central and South America about that. But it looks like radically different from what we do here.
I don't think it's radically different, but there is much more focus on IPM. The thing within Europe is that statement is fair as a generalization, but Europe varies drastically, mostly north-south. So the farther north you go, in particular Scandinavian countries, and if we break it down even further, Sweden and Denmark are extremely restrictive in their use of any kind of chemicals, whether we're talking about rodents or we're talking about insects. There's a very strict IPM protocol in place, which requires professionals to start at the least invasive thing and basically give everything else a shot before you go to chemicals. And then other parts of Europe, as you move south and east, where they generally also tend to have larger issues for longer periods of time because of warmer climates and the rest, you'll see that they are less restrictive. Now, as a whole, the European Union recently passed, and this has been the big thing in Europe the last 2 years, they recently passed legislation on rodenticides, which required them to be half of the concentration of active that was in there previously. So what we're used to in the U.S., which is 50 parts per million, right, 0.005%, whether it's bromadiolone, brodifocum, any of the second-generation anticoagulants, the retail market in Europe has now gone to half that level. So they've really started to divide that market into amateur and professional, not only by packaging size, but also by concentration strength. So that's where Europe has been, progressive in some sense, and in other senses it's also been a bad thing. For instance, they applied that 0.025 rule across the board, but didn't look at the fact that some actives are stronger than others. Brodifocum, for instance, still works very well at half of its normal concentration. Other things that are out there do not. And so there's a concern within the industry itself that looking at things just as a blanket statement saying, okay, we're using half the amount of chemicals that used to be out there might actually cause resistance as opposed to solve the problems just as effectively.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that because like I said, I've been following the whole rodenticide law and trying to understand it, but I know it's a lot different, the terminology and things like farmers, everybody who wants to use a rodenticide now pretty much professionally has to be licensed, whether you use it on private property or if you're like what we know here in the U.S. as a public applicator or a commercial company. What's the deal with that? I mean, what's the law as far as getting everybody licensed or certified?
Yeah, basically, if you want to buy more than a pound at a time, you have to go through at least a training course to get a pest control, some kind of pest control license. And they did break the licenses down to professionals who can use products indoors and outdoors. They can use the higher concentrations. They're obviously trained how to use it properly. Then your next rung down is the professional application of farmers who are also able to use certain products in a lot of areas. And as you go down the ladder to amateurs, very, very restrictive on what they can use, in particular where. They have to be indoor placements, inside bait stations and all that. And that is actually, I think personally, and I can't speak for my whole company here, but I think personally that is not a bad thing.
Right.
But again, it's the implementation has been a little bit roughshod. A lot of the registrations were not processed in time by the authorities, which caused some issues in the market with lack of product, and that's not something you want either. Because the rodent populations have been going up pretty much worldwide, in particular because the weather's been warmer. I mean, there's been less winters, which in turn means longer breeding seasons, and so you've seen more issues, in particular with rodents.
Right. So
the European IPM approach is good. It just might be a little too extreme on the other end. It's not a loose market, but it might be overly regulated. I think finding that balance is going to be the thing in the next 5 years.
Gotcha. And as far as the whole there's a comparison. I'm trying to understand it. I've tried to talk to a couple of guys overseas about it in different groups. Regarding the difference between the accreditation that they're doing now for companies and what we do here as like National Pest Management Association. And I'm starting to understand that is completely different. It's mostly an accreditation of associations. Are you familiar with that, and can you explain that?
I'm not as familiar with that. I mean, I know there is a continuing education process in most countries, but the associations are more involved with the accreditation, that I know, and standard that companies are held to, as opposed to just being an industry group, which is kind of how I feel like the NPMA is more of an industry group as opposed to an accreditation association. Right,
and that's what I'm starting to see that, and I said, that's actually, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a good thing if you actually belong to an association or you're an accreditation. A lot of professional industries, I mean, that I've been, electricians and welders, they all really have unions and accreditation and things that they go through, which our associations really don't have here. So, to say that you are a member of an association, from a marketing perspective or from a being able to get new business, that is really important. Unless you're part of like Copasan, it really has a whole lot of weight. And when I look at what's going on over there, and I try to ask, I was kind of confused because I'm asking what is the accreditation, as well as more accreditation of associations that you're part of, and then that's how you get accredited and all that. So I was trying to understand that. I'm trying to talk to as many people to get an understanding, because I see that there's differences, and we just, I think, sometimes talk two different languages when they don't understand me. Then I have enough trouble with English and Spanish. So I'm trying to understand these guys, and they're not understanding my question or what I'm asking. So it's kind of sometimes I get lost, or they lose me. But yeah, so that's.
Well, I think also, I mean, depending on what part of Europe you're in, there are certain countries in Europe that require, if you are a professional pest control technician, and you are required to be part of the association for a couple of reasons. One is so that they make sure that you're being accredited and you're held to the same standard as anyone else. The other is the fact that whether you're a part of an association or not, as a professional, you're getting the benefits that association offers. So their feeling is, and this probably goes back to the fact that they're a little bit more towards the socialist side of things politically, but they require to be part of the association because you're getting the benefits. And so there are places where everyone's the association. I think that is a big difference between Europe and the U.S., where you can go to a state show, and I go to 50 state shows a year sometimes, and there are very few associations where more than 20, 30% of the state's members are state's pest controllers are members. And so I think the fact that everyone's a member also means that everyone's getting the same information and is able to work as a whole. And I think that might be something that our industry needs to look at is if you are a licensed pest control technician, be part of the association, whether that means making the fees smaller for the small guys or such. But it's a huge benefit that I think a lot of companies don't get or don't realize.
Yeah, no, because here it's like everything is in different states. Each state has a different CEU requirement. It has a different name, what they call a technician, whether you're licensed, whether you're certified, whether, whatever. We don't know in different states. I mean, here in Florida you're an ID card holder. And the CPO, which is the certified operator, is responsible for your training. And most of the training is just showing up. It's not even really verifiable training. So you can not know any English, sit in a class for 2 hours and walk away and get a certificate that you attended. You didn't understand a darn thing that you were taught. That worries me. And it should worry a lot of people. It should worry the customer. So I'm seeing, that the association, pretty much the memberships are for the companies. And unless you're the company owner, the CPO, the company is the one that's getting the membership, not the individuals. And that's what I've always fought for on the podcast, is for the technician to grow. Make the information, the training, everything on demand and easy to access. Because in some states, it's 3 years before you take a CEU class. Here in Florida, it's every year, but it's only 2 hours. So how much training, and it's verifiable and all that. I think the industry here needs to get a lot better at that, and I don't think we don't want any additional rules.
And I think that one of the big issues is how much it varies between states.
Yeah, it varies greatly, and and whether you're licensed or unlicensed, whether you're registered or not registered, it's just nobody. I mean, we really don't speak the same language in the industry. In the U.S. as one entity and in one country, we speak different terms, where, there is you can't, like if you're a technician in Texas, you can't come to Florida and say, okay, I'm a technician here. You have to start from zero. I'm looking at all this stuff and I'm saying, how do, and I'm looking at Europe and I'm looking at, it seems like they're working towards one common language, I think, that's the feeling I get from reading what I read. Again, I'm here and I'm just observing what the news is putting out, that there seems to be more of a centralization or at least speaking the same language or getting the same, especially across, since you're part of the European Union. That's the feeling I get. Is that something that, am I going in the right direction there?
Yeah, you are. They are trying to do that, and actually, that's been one of the big issues, is the fact that they can't agree on how. Like I was mentioning earlier, Denmark in particular is extremely restrictive in how they allow even professionals to place products, whereas a country like Spain is much more proactive, allows the certified, licensed operators to decide what is best for the account as a primary. So, where it might take you 8 months to be able to finally place rodenticides in Denmark, you can do it day one in Spain. And so the issue then becomes, obviously, it's very hard to standardize two systems that are that far apart.
Yeah. No, that's definitely...
And I think that's the same as trying to standardize pest control licensing between, like you mentioned, Florida and Texas. I mean, I know there are states in the U.S. where there is an apprenticeship program. You cannot get a license for a year. You have to be an apprentice or have to train underneath a technician that teaches you how to do things correctly. And other states, you can, like you said, sign up for a class online, take the test, and nobody even knows if you were the one answering the questions, but you get your license anyway.
Yeah, no, I saw that one. I think I forgot which state it was. It was $45. You show up with a driver's license. It's a booklet, and you fill out the license, and you take the exam right there. And right then and there, you can open up a pest control business on your own. I got to remember what state it is, but that's how easy it was. In Florida, it's 3 years under a certified operator, or if you have a bachelor's degree in entomology or agronomy, something like that, then it's 1 year of practical training with a bachelor's degree, 4 years of education. So yeah, it's the strangest thing in the world that, different states will have it different ways. But so let's go to South America. And I mean, I see the videos of guys, I'm Cuban. I'm in Miami. A great percentage of our clients here are Hispanic from Central and South America and the Caribbean. And I hear all the time, I need you to come and do fumigación to my house. And I'm thinking for roaches. And then I see the videos of guys going into offices with hot foggers and fogging offices in Central and South America. And I said, that is radically different to what we know to do here as pest control. We go from one extreme to the total opposite extreme. And what's the difference? I mean, you're going to Central South America, doing pest control training. What do you see as far as compared to the U.S. and in Europe? I mean, do a contrast there.
A huge gap in the education level on the pest control side. I mean, I'm only dealing with farmers and professional operators now. For one thing, South America is more or less an ag market. That is where the bulk of your pesticides are going into, whether you're talking about rodents or you're talking about flies or roaches. I mean, a lot of the guys, a lot of companies still have what could be termed as professional operators, but they work for a farmer. They're still pest control technicians, but it's their job within a farm because these farms are big. Now, it's funny you bring up Cuba because the conference I was just at in Argentina did have a presentation by the Cuban Ministry of Health and Ag, or I don't know the official name, but they were talking about how they do certain types of fumigation and control, and he was showing pictures, very proudly, mind you, of how efficient his technicians are, and they're in a home where there's, in the picture they've taken, there's mom cooking a meal, the kids are in the living room playing, there's all types of food and plates and everything else out on the table, and here a guy walks in the front door with a handheld fogger, and he fogs the entire inside of the house, and this is mosquito and fly control.
Yep.
And there's absolutely no talk about PPE. There's no mention of the fact that there's, now a considerable level of insecticide in the food that's being cooked on the open flame in an area that's being fogged. And this is normal. And 900 people in the room at the conference and are going, oh, very good, very efficient. How quickly could you do that?
Yes. And this is where
there's a huge gap in education levels.
Yeah, no, I get it all the time where, the customer will say, I need you to come in and fumigate my home. And I kept thinking, what is fumigate? Why do they keep using that term where I wasn't familiar with it? And then all of a sudden I start getting into how, and I look at, Africa and stuff like that, and I see a guy with a hot fogger. What do you call the, propane, like ULV type of fogger in an office.
Propane ULV portable fogger,
Yeah, and they're going into an office and they're fogging this office, and then I get, now I understand the terminology of why they keep asking for fumigación, because that's only used if you're using fume in a tent job or something like that, or in a warehouse or whatever. And I thought, and then I'm talking to other guys in different groups in Central South America, and yes, in Spain, which I actually do have the equivalent.
Anytime you're spraying or putting any kind of chemical out is fumigation, is what I figured out.
Yes.
It's a general term for application of chemicals, basically, any kind of liquid chemical.
Yes, and that's it. So I got the, here we have the what do you call that? Pest management operations, from, Purdue produces that. And then I got the one. Yeah. And I got the one from Spain, from their entomology department over there at the University in Spain. And I think it's in Barcelona. I forget if it's in Barcelona. I actually ordered it online. It's more closely related to the Malice Guide, but it's in Spanish. So I said, because I train a lot of guys here in Spanish, and I said that's a great tool to have. So I ordered it and I have it. And, so I look at all this and I'm talking to these guys, and then some guys that I talk to, like in Spain and, in different, like maybe Argentina, which is probably a little bit more, more advanced in their pest control of residential. The guys are talking the same language.
That's definitely the most advanced country in South America at this point with pest control is Argentina, and a lot of that has to do again with the level of commitment from organizations and companies. I mean, the largest distributor in Argentina is a company by the name of Chemotecnica, and they've done a really good job of kind of looking at what's going on in the U.S. and saying, okay, we need to offer our customers better training. We need to show them how to do things correctly, and that's the way you change any industry for the better is to do a lot of training, whether we're talking about South America and the differences or we're talking about North America. But yeah, I'm sure I've been to Miami enough. I have a lot of customers down in the Caribbean and South Florida where I know exactly what you're talking about. When they say, no, just put it out there. Hold on, there's proper ways to do things.
Yeah, I have every customer that I tell them I got to put a rodent station. They're like, oh, no, just throw it out in the backyard. The last guy used to throw it out in the backyard or throw it in my attic. I'm like, I'm not going to jail for you or anybody. I see that.
Unfortunately, we deal with that. And if we get back to rodenticides, that's something that we deal with as a company quite often. I mean, I get 2 to 3 calls a week on average from U.S. customers, consumers who've had pest control operators come in or have done the work themselves. And we can delve into at a later date the internet effect of there's Mr. Jones is buying 18 pounds of bait and not reading any instructions, but we even get it from pest control operators who are doing things the same way they've been doing it for 40 years, and some dog gets into a bait bowl, and you ask the homeowner, well, how did he get to the bait? Well, the pest control operator put it down. Well, where did he put it? How did the dog get in the bait station, for instance? Well, there was no bait station. He threw it behind my fridge.
Right.
And, we moved the fridge to get something, and the dog grabbed it.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
so we fight that same thing in the U.S.
Yeah, no, I thought when the rodenticide law went in, and I was like kind of excited because rodenticide is one of those things that, if a kid gets in it, or even you get a not an anticoagulant, but a neurotoxin, and a kid or a dog gets in and there's no antidote for it, we got a serious problem. And most people don't understand that. And even pros in the industry, I ask guys, do you know that that's not an anticoagulant? That's a neurotoxin. There's no antidote for it. And when they changed the law and they went ahead and removed a lot of the rodenticides off the shelf, and there was the whole debacle with one manufacturer not wanting to comply, and then they removed all of this, and I said, great. You got it in little prepackaged stations. You got to throw them away when they're empty. It's a great thing. The client can still do some stuff, solve problems in their home, but they're not throwing out a case of rodenticide. But then you can order it online from an online supplier and get an 18-pound bucket. And that made no sense to me that you can still do that. That was just mind-blowing that wouldn't have been regular. It says, no, unless you have a license, you can't order 18 pounds of rodenticide. So they can go online and get it.
And I think that idea that just because you made the minimum size on a second-generation anticoagulant, 16 pounds, that was going to prevent homeowners from buying it, I think that idea was a little bit lost.
Yeah.
And it probably didn't help that some manufacturers have decided to put what can only, it says not for individual resale on them, but some of the packs that you find inside these boxes are very clearly resellable packs, and you still find that going on as well, which doesn't help. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is online. I think the Amazon fine probably helped, but it was not large enough to act as enough of a deterrent. I don't think to.
Yeah, and most of the products they were selling. Yeah, most of the products they were selling were unregistered products, which was the biggest beef the EPA had. It wasn't a registered, EPA product. It didn't, it was a Chinese product that it was just brought in and resold without an EPA registration. But I think that,
right, exactly.
I think that if we're going to, I'm one of those guys that I don't have a big beef with the do-it-yourself market. I know a lot of guys in this industry have a big beef with that, and that, they pay for license and insurance and all this, and then somebody can just buy the product off the shelf and do it themselves. I don't have an issue with people doing it themselves. I have an issue with you're selling a product that can potentially kill somebody, and the person is never going to read that label, when most people that I know in the industry don't read the entire label. What makes you think a homeowner is going to read it? So I think if you're going to sell an over-the-counter product, that it needs to be a single-use product and disposable. So in other words, you buy it in a station, it's sealed, you can't open it, you can't refill it, you got to throw it out, and we don't sell you a bucket of bait. And I think that's what where we should move to, because, people again are throwing it in their backyard when they're buying this and solving the problem. I had customers just tell me that. I know I solved the problem a couple of months ago, and I threw the bait up there and we had to leave for a week. I'm like, yeah, and you're asking me to do the same thing again. So that's it just doesn't, it doesn't register to them. But, that's going to be an entire battle I think we're going to fight with for a long time before we get anywhere with that. So
no, I agree with you there. And I don't have a problem with that over online market either. Especially for small companies starting out, it's a great way to get product without all the add-on fees that some of these distributors unfortunately charge. And
right.
We don't sell on. We are a distribution company. Through distribution. One of the reasons is that at least there's some level of education and specialization being provided.
Right.
You go into your local distributor, no matter who that distributor is. They have product knowledge. You can ask, well, how is this applied perfectly? But I think the crux of the problem, I think what you said that is absolutely 100% accurate, is that not enough people read the full label. I mean, I end every single talk I give about rodent control with one slide that says RTFL, and let you fill in the third blank, but it's read the label.
Yeah. I've used that before. That's hysterical. But no, and that's one of the things that, I mean, even, I got technicians talk to all the time in the field, and I'm like, what are you using? I'm using and they give me the brand name, and I'm saying, yeah, but, what are you using it for, and how are you using it? And they're just given the product. They're not trained on the label, and it's a common problem. And, this thing that we have to be productive, we have to get the work done, and we have to put people on the truck. And I understand all that. I own a business. But at one point, what distinguishes you then from the homeowner doing the same darn thing? And you're claiming you're a professional, you're doing the same thing the homeowner does. You're just applying a baseboard spray nilly-willy. You don't know what you're applying, what the mode of action is, how it works, and if it's even effective. And I think that in the industry, we really need to somehow, how do we get better at that? And that's the challenge. But again, we're.
I think a lot of it is also working together. I think that's how we get better at it. The Pest Cemetery group in particular, I really like because it's guys asking questions of each other. It's guys helping each other out. I mean, that is one thing I will say that made me love this industry, and I still love about it, is the fact that when I was in chemical sales, it was cutthroat. Nobody told you anything. Nobody was willing to help you out when you started. It was, it was thrown in the deep end. You swim or you don't, one or the other. Here, people willing to help you. Use this product in this areas. Use that product in these areas. This works. That doesn't. And that is one of the great things about this industry that I don't think it's. Everyone talks about it, but I don't think it's applied. It's used enough. I think that is one of the best parts of being in this industry, is that people are willing to help you when you do have questions to ask, and the fact that there's places to ask those questions now, and that guys like you have podcasts to help people out and learn about new things is one of the ways we're going to be more professional. And hopefully, I mean, the idea in Europe is basically to slowly, I think what they're trying to do is to slowly whittle away the amateur market and say, look, if you have a serious problem, you need to call a professional. Right. And I think that's how it should be. But on that same scale, as professionals, we have to be professionals. We can't just look like we're doing the same thing any homeowner could do. We have to know our stuff. And
I lost you there.
No, I'm still here.
Okay. I thought I lost you there for a second. Okay. Yeah, no, that's the big beef that I've had. And I get it from both sides. I get it from the client who I walk into the home and they're telling me how I'm going to perform their pest control service. And, you wouldn't go to your proctologist when he has to do a colonoscopy and tell him how he's going to insert the camera.
Or your plumber, for that matter.
Yeah.
I mean, if we get back to people who enter the home, I mean, nobody questions their plumber. Guy says your pump's done, I need to replace it. Everyone goes, okay, what's it going to cost me?
Yeah.
And yet they're willing to argue with pest control professionals.
Yeah, and
placing toxic products in their home.
Yeah, this is the only industry I've been in the home remodeling and business and just about every industry in the home business. And I said, you wouldn't tell an electrician how to put in a breaker. Why do we get every customer telling us how we're going to perform pest control in the home? And I get it, I get it all the time. And usually I have to work that I've learned to work it into my sales presentation of how we're going to perform the service so that we deal with that objection up front so that we curb that in the home. We've been able to do that, but we do it in the upfront sales presentation of how we perform our service. And we have very specific protocols for every pest that we deal with. And that's generally how we're going to do it. And there's always an exception, but that's rarely the case. But the customer goes on blogs, they go on videos. They failed miserably. I mean, I walk into the home where the roach tablets are there. The boric acid is in the corner, thrown somewhere. They sprayed the heck out of that kitchen. They've got the stations. They've got the gel bait all over the counter. And they're saying, I've tried everything and nothing works. I don't know what you're going to do. And my second question in mine is, why am I even here? To begin with, why did you call me?
Right.
And they're like, and with rodenticides is the same thing. Is just throw it on the other. I'm not going to pay $200 for stations. I'm not going to pay this. They just want it thrown somewhere and solve the problem. And it's like, so you're telling me you're going to put out traps and glue boards and these little stations where the residents say, yeah, but I've done all that. I still can't get rid of the problem. They don't understand the rodent biology.
Done it properly is a bit, proper placement is as much a part of rodent control. I mean,
yeah.
We spend, with our rodenticides, we spend an inordinate amount of time getting the formulation right to try to be as palatable to rodents all over, the entire continent, really. I mean, our formulation is specific to North America, but we spend all this time to try to get it right, and then people place it wrongly, but then it's our product that doesn't work. Right. I put it up there. Well, the rat can't get there, so how did you expect it to work?
Yeah. Let me ask you. You just mentioned something that was very curious to me. You mentioned the formulation is mostly for the North American continent. Is there a difference in palatability for different rats and different rodents around the world for what, a Norway rat or what we know as a roof?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So talk to me about that, because I'm curious about that, guys. Talk to me. What's the difference there? Or fundamentally, what do you encounter?
Well, if we talk about our formulation in particular, in our soft bait, for instance, we put a product in there called lard. I'm pig fat. I mean, nice and simple. Grandma's been using it for forever. Very palatable. Very nice and soft. Holds up the heat and cold really well. But it's high fat. It's what rodents are looking for, and that is common around a lot of our formulations. But the rest of the ingredients, no matter where we're selling into, we try to, on a larger scale. Obviously, we can't do state by state or country by country. But every continent has its own kind of food preferences, and most continents have more than one. But there's a general central kind of food preference. The U.S., for instance, is a culture that is very high in sugar in our foods and fairly high in glutinous products, so the wheats of the world and barleys and stuff like that. And so because rodents are commensal pests, right, so they eat from our table, it means that they're generally eating our scraps. And if our food is high in sugar, high in fat, high in gluten, that's what they're used to. So if you put a bait out there that's this wonderfully healthy thing and lasts forever, they're probably never going to touch it, unless they're desperate for food. So you've got to change the formulation, at least on a larger scale, so that it reflects the food preferences of the area that the rodents are living in.
Gotcha.
And so the formulation we have, our Brigand SB soft bait, is a formulation that is sold in North America and the Caribbean, where the food preference is as it is. Now that, I'm not going to say that it's a whole different formula, but there are differences, sometimes subtle, sometimes extreme, in that same bromadiolin soft bait that Brigand is across the world. So the formulation we sell into Europe and the formulation we sell into Asia and the formulation we sell into Australia is different from the one we have in North America, because you have to do your research and reflect the food preferences of the local population, as it were.
Interesting. So let's say a Norway rat that is in Australia is the same Norway rat that we have here, but because of the food preference they've adapted to, you would bring in the same product and it would probably fail because of that food preference. That is interesting that they adapt to what we do. And I never thought about it that way. That's just it just hit me.
Well, yeah, exactly. And also you have to remember rats, all rodents, but rats in particular, pass down food preferences through mother's milk. So whatever mom was eating, that preference for food is going to get passed down to the pups. And so, that food preference goes generation to generation, and it will change with what they're eating, which is why, in New York you have rats who might really like something that is similar to pizza, and you're going to go out to, the Pacific Northwest, and they might really like Chinese food. I mean, it's no different than people in that sense, in that they get used to what they're eating, and so that's their first preference. So every time you're trying to get them to take a bait, you have to be wary of the fact that not only is there aversion to a new food source, right, neophobia, but there's also that preference that they have to get over. They have to go by it and decide one time that this is something new I want to try.
Right.
And the way you lower that resistance is by putting something out there that's very similar to the food they're already eating.
Right. So how does, so you just mentioned two things that are very important, which I hadn't had a discussion about before. Is, let's say, East Coast, West Coast, that you're in, and a rodent population might prefer one thing living in New York, and if you're living out in Seattle or in some other place, maybe in a more rural area of the country, what explain why one guy says I'm having great success with X bait, and one guy will say in another part of the country, I've used it, it doesn't work for us, it sucks. It has nothing to do with the bait. It has to probably do with where that rodent is, and which leads me to the third question: is if one manufacturer is on every shelf and every big box in the store in the country, like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, and they're selling one rodenticide, why people would be putting out the same product all over the country, because it's really one product, and they're not getting any control. And they moved from New York over here, and they used to use that product over there, it works great, and they're using it here, and they're totally failing, the homeowner's failing miserably. So is that what I'm hearing? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, as a generality, yes, that is accurate. I mean, there's other things obviously that play into it. In particular, how and one of the reasons that IPM has been so good, proper IPM has been so good for the industry, is that one of the things with rodents in particular that plays into it is the removal of the current food source. I mean, you can get past that aversion and that limitation because of what they're currently eating very quickly if you remove what they are eating. So we see it on farms all the time. A guy will go, well, they're not eating this, they're not touching it. And you go, your first instinct go, well, it's not similar to the food they're currently eating. They're eating high-protein chicken feed over there, and you're offering them, even if you offer them a soft bait, high in lard, high in moisture, they're supposed to love it, and they're going, well, the soft baits just don't work for me. Well, you remove that other food source, and all of a sudden they're looking for food, and now you've got a really good food source out there in the bait for them, right? Because they still need the protein, they still need the fat. They need to eat 10% of their body weight every day just to survive, just to keep those organs functioning and warm, and be able to breed. And so they're going to have to find a food. So a lot of it comes down to the technician doing things right. But in general, yes, the closer it is to their current food source, which is why, I spent, and I know Jeff, I picked a lot of this up from Jeff McGovern as well, but when we're doing presentations, we talk a lot about figuring out what that rodent is currently eating. Because the closer you can get to its current food source, the better. And you'll see a lot of old farmers will say, well, bait used to be so much better when they just sold us the active. They would buy a 5% concentrate and they'd mix it in with the food source that the rats were eating, and then they put that back out there and they got control. Well, the reason they got good control right away was because the food source didn't change.
Right.
But those days of mixing your own active, making your own product are long gone. I mean, we're never going to get back to that, and we shouldn't. There wasn't enough control. There were a lot of secondary problems from that. But the reason it did work so well is because they were just taking their current food source and adding bromidilin or brodifacoum or warfarin or whatever it was to it, and the rats had no aversion to eating that food because nothing changed. There's ways to get around that aversion by being a good technician.
Right. So as a technician, I'm going to play and I am ignorant about this at this point because you brought up so many things that I didn't know. How does a technician in the field, let's say I'm a technician who's in Miami, and says, I'm having an issue controlling rodents, based on the food source, because the food source in most of the products are either proprietary formulation. We don't really know what's in the food source. We know what the active ingredient is. How does a professional in the field say, I'm having this situation, I'm in Miami, what would be the best bait to use? Or how do I determine what the best bait to use is to control this problem if I can't, or if let's say I can identify, we're doing a restaurant. We know where the food source is. We know the dumpsters are there. There's some things that, you close the dumpsters. You have no debris on the floor. You make sure the restaurant doesn't throw anything outside. Once you've done that, how do you determine selecting the right bait? Because I think that I haven't asked that question ever. How do you select the right bait? What's the process that you would go through?
Well, I mean, a lot of manufacturers' reps will be fairly upfront about the basics of a formulation. I'll be honest, I probably know more than a lot of other reps that are out in the field because I helped create the baits themselves. Mm-hmm. So, I spent some time on that factory floor and talking to the chemists in the Pelgar labs, going, right, this is what we're trying to mimic. This is what we're competing against. This is what we need. Against food sources. It's one of the reasons we found lard to be such a good item in our bait, and in particular with restaurant accounts, a lard-based bait or a high-fat bait, if we use a more general term, which is generally also easier to get information on, will work better. But a lot of times your reps will be able to say at least, well, there's flour in here, or you'll be able to see seeds, and so if they're in a warehouse that has a lot of grass seed or bird seed or stuff like that, that's probably part of their diet, and so a bait that's got that seed in it is probably going to work well. But in all honesty, one of the reasons that soft bait as a whole has been so successful in the U.S. Getting in is because it hits on so many of those areas that rodents like. All soft baits are moister than blocks that are out in the market, and higher in fat, and so generally they've worked better than a lot of blocks. You'll see guys who said, "Well, I could never get any block to work. Soft bait is awesome. It's the only product that I use now because it works." And you go into other areas, and the rodents are eating very dry foods, and so the soft bait isn't working as well, and they have better success with blocks. But what I always tell people is, because of exactly what you said, it is hard to get formulation information sometimes. Even myself, and I obviously think my products are very good, and they've been very well accepted with the industry, but when I go with a technician and say, well, what bait do we want to use here, and we cannot identify exactly what the food source is, or we're not sure which product will work, I've been in a bait station where I've placed 4 different types of bait. And you come back 2 weeks later and say, right, well, here's what they ate the most of, and let's go with that going forward. And that's a very good way to do it. And generally what I'll do when I do that is too soft to block, and then you see what the uptick is.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's understanding really well understanding that rodent biology of what that rodent is really eating in that area, what he's preferring, having that knowledge, and then basically testing, which I've done that before. We've gone into a place where I put 3 or 4 different baits to see what they would eat. And, we find that they prefer, this one basically 2 to 1. It's kind of like rodents prefer 2 to 1 of our products. It makes a good, that makes a good, a tagline for an ad. But I've done that. And that, I figured out,
yeah, but the only way to know that is to do a test that's controllable, which means generally it was done in a lab. And I can tell you from my own experience, lab rodents are not anywhere close to rodents out in the field.
Right.
I mean, I generally think that the best thing, rodent control in particular, the best thing that you could do is listen to Bobby Corrigan, who always says he wants you to think like a rodent. I mean, that is the best advice you can give any technician who's doing rodent control work, is think like a rodent.
Right.
When it comes to where they're hiding, where they're moving, where bait stations should be placed, thinking like a rodent is key to getting good rodent control, because once you understand what they want, what they need, and where they're going, you can kind of force them to go into the snap traps that you've placed, to get the bait that you've placed, or go onto the glue boards that you put out there,
Right.
No matter what kind of thing.
Right. So we talked a lot about all the biology, and mostly the industry is a rodenticide industry. But one of the biggest things that we don't deal a whole lot with, or a lot of people don't deal with, is exclusion work. And I think exclusion, to me, as a pest control professional, what I try to teach our clients is that, especially our clients that want a natural solution to a problem, and they don't want to use the chemicals. I said, really, the only way to do that is to modify the environment, remove the food sources, remove the water sources, and then perform exclusion. And I've used products like Excluder, which is mostly what we use. The type of construction we have down here, exclusion work is pretty simple for us. But I understand you got an exclusion product that you guys sell. Talk to me about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, like we talked about way back in the beginning, IPM is where the industry is going, and it's really important. But IPM is the approach is important. You can't just do one thing and think that you've solved the problem,
right.
Especially with rodents who are tenacious pests. You have to do you can't just put out rodenticide and throw it everywhere. Bait stations are part of the solution with bait in them, but so are snap traps, glue boards, and proper exclusion is probably the number one growing area of rodent control, and the least talked about, or the least used area of rodent control. If you do proper exclusion, you can get bait stations to get twice the amount of hits, and that's very simple way to get more effective control very quickly, because you're forcing them to find other ways to move around, to go to your bait stations to try to look for food. I mean, your basic idea with exclusion is, in particular with buildings, if they're going inside and that is where their food source is, if you've locked them out, guess what? They've got to find other food. And if near those holes that you've excluded is your bait station with bait in it, that's what they're going to go to. And so you've become a better pest control operator by doing proper exclusion work. And so, there is, like you said, excluders out there. There's a lot of products out there for exclusion. We have something we think is very unique. I mean, there's nothing else like it. It's not a vinyl. It comes in a caulking tube, and it's a paste. Is the easiest way I can put it. It's got the color of concrete. It's a linseed oil-based formula, basically. But what it does is it's very gunky and sticky, and it's already got metal shards in there, which is the benefit you get from excluder, right? They try to claw and chew into the excluder, and they don't like the feeling. It's cutting into their gums. It's cutting into their paws when they're scraping at it. Well, this has that same benefit, but it allows you to plug a hole, and it's gunky as well. So because they can't regurgitate when they bite into it, it doesn't leave a really good feeling in their mouth, and they can't get it out, and so they generally move away from that hole. They'll try to go back to that hole once or twice, but after that, they'll just stop using it. So the product's called Rodent Stop, and what it does is once you plug a hole with it, it creates a film on the outside, a semi-rigid surface, which is paintable after 48 hours, so you can completely hide it. But underneath, that 3/4 of an inch to an inch of depth that you've placed it with stays soft and gunky for up to 5 years. So basically what happens is it dries out, it cures very slowly. It sticks to everything. It'll stick to a Teflon pan from what I've seen.
Oh, wow.
And then, when they try to get into it, it's still gunky underneath. They think they're chewing into something that's hard, but it's still gunky underneath. They don't like the feeling. They just stop going to the hole. So you've gotten really good exclusion without having to do a whole ton of concrete work or stuff excluder up there. And the amount of guys that are still using that foam, they're called Great Stuff or something like that, which I think looks terrible. Plus, you have to come back and cut it.
Yeah, no, and
it doesn't really work. I mean, rats go through that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, they'll eat a foot of that without even blinking. And a lot of I've seen it done, and we did it for a client. Just foam it up, and I'm going to fix it. The hole was like you can fit a cat through there, and I said, look, they're going to eat through that thing. You better fix it within the next day or two. They're still going to eat through it. And I went back 2 days later to remove the rodent in the attic, and sure enough, they had eaten a perfect hole through that foam. So yeah, foam is not an ideal. How would I use this? How big of a gap can you plug? Obviously you apply it like a caulk, so you can't have a really big area because does it collapse? How does it behave? And in different, what's like the biggest?
You can do about 2 by 2 by an inch deep before it'll start to sag on itself.
Okay.
So it's not for your giant gaps. It's for those little holes. I mean, the number one area we've seen guys using it, especially in restaurant accounts, has been what we call the plumber's gap. For some reason, every plumber needs a 6-inch hole for a 4-inch pipe, leaving a beautiful rat runway.
Yes.
Generally on the top of the pipe. And so a lot of guys have been plugging that hole from both sides of a wall. Electrical conduit lines, it's got the wires on the inside, but again, they've cut a hole through the ceiling or the walls where they need space to get the conduit through and stuff like that. And they're really nice areas for mice and rats to run on, all right? They have just an easy time running on top of that pipe. It's like a highway for them. So plugging those gaps has been the biggest area, but also expansion joints, the side of garage doors with that. You'll see the jamb will have a little hole, a gap to move on, and because it doesn't, it's not like a concrete where it's going to create tension between two surfaces. You can use it in expansion gaps, which need to stay semi-rigid as well. So you can plug those seam areas. But yeah, 2 by 2 by an inch deep is about as big as you want to go before. After that hole probably needs a harder type of exclusion, whether that's a metal plate or any kind of more physical barrier. This is your, have a tube or two in the truck, your plug-and-play type of exclusion. It gives you that exclusion you need, but it doesn't take mixing. It doesn't take this whole process. A technician can use it very quickly. I mean, I've seen guys who are used to using it now use an entire tube in 20 minutes. They're using a butter knife because it's so easy to spread. And they're getting the exclusion. They come back 2 days later, they paint over it with an oil-based paint, and the homeowner doesn't even know where the holes were.
Gotcha. And as far as heat, because a lot of us have those boxes in the back, or we're in vans. As far as heat goes, does it damage the product? How well does it hold up in the back of a truck?
Only above 140 degrees.
Okay, so that's not we can fry it.
It's good from minus 40 to plus 140. And you can apply it. We had guys, one of the first test areas we had to use in was Minnesota in the winter, and we had guys applying the product at minus 5 Fahrenheit and going, I was amazed it still came out of the tube.
Right. Okay. So it doesn't freeze up. It handles. How long? What's the shelf life on it if you buy a tube and you got it laying in your truck?
5 years.
5 years.
Even after you've opened the tube, you still have a 5-year shelf life.
Wow. So it's pretty good. I mean, because we don't that would be a product for me because I do some little bit of exclusion, especially around those pipes. You're right. That's my number one exclusion that we do is really around pipes because they leave these huge gaps. And in the past, we've just stuffed it with excluder or cemented it in, which is a pain if it's really big to cement it in. Or some gaps in the ceiling where the construction guy, left a hole in the ceiling somewhere and they're climbing through there and we can just, usually use it.
Yeah, it's unbelievable sometimes the gaps you find and the gaps people leave and think, well, a rodent can't get up there. They'll get anywhere.
Yeah, no.
I mean, we have a really great, if you go on YouTube and just put in Rodent Stop, all one word, Rodent Stop, you'll see a really great 2-minute video on how to use the product and what it looks like. We have a guy apply it and then cut into it so you can actually see what we mean when we say it's rigid on the outside but gunky underneath. It's a cool product. I mean, Jeff McGovern was one of the first guys who tested it for us, and he just said he just had fun using it, which that speaks a little bit. Jeff's an interesting guy in that sense, but he knows his stuff.
Interesting. Indeed. Yeah. When you're a geek, I guess you like all that stuff. And I'm actually gonna try it because I honestly have not heard about it until I talked to him. And I was like, I'm always looking for products like that because it's just something I can put in our toolbox, something that's easy to use, solves a little problem without having to make a big deal out of it. And, we can go into a home, we're doing our initial service, get it done. It's 2 minutes to get something like that done. So I really, really did like what I was seeing. So I'm going to drop that video into this post as soon as we're done. When I produce it, I'm going to go ahead and drop that video in there too. So it'll, people go on our blog. They can see it. So I think it's a great idea. I'm going to go buy a tube. Univar sells it because our supplier down here is Univar. If you guys are selling it through there?
Yeah, Univar sells it. Target sells it. Residex sells it. I mean, we've got every distributor selling it out there. And they're doing a really good job. All of them are doing a really good job selling it for us and letting people know about it. Like you said, some people, a lot of people haven't heard about it yet, and the word's slowly getting out there. But it's a great little plug-and-play item that everyone should have on their truck, and it's a great upsell. Most people buy, they're paying $16 a tube, and it sounds expensive, but they're getting $50 from the homeowner on the job, and it's doing quite a bit of work. It's plugging the holes, and again, it makes you look like a professional. You know what you're doing. It's something that's only available on the PCO side, and it's green on top of that. There's you don't have to worry about any repellency. You don't have to worry about anything that's going to kill anything. I mean, in the end, it's not going to kill the rodent either, but that's not meant to get rid of those holes, to plug the problem, and let you get the rodents to go to the stations and the snap traps and the glue boards you've put out there.
Right. And it only comes in one color right now? That's it? What color is that?
It comes in gray.
In gray.
And it's, like I said, it's fully paintable. So
Gotcha.
48 hours later, once the outside surface is set, you can come back and paint it. And actually our restaurant accounts, guys who service the McDonald's and the Taco Bells of the world, that's what they've been, the restaurant themselves has been giving them their paint, their official paint colors.
Right.
And they come back 2-3 days later, they paint over the holes, and you can't even tell where they were.
No, I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm gonna order a tube. I'm gonna probably do a little video on it to show how easy it is because our people, we got a lot of followers on our videos for our personal business and then now also for the Pest Geek podcast. And I think anything that we can use that's green, that we can solve a problem, not have to apply a chemical, I'm all for it. That's the whole nature of our business. And a lot of guys out there, and one of the things you mentioned is exclusion is not really that big. There are guys who specialize in exclusion, but it's mainly because of the labor cost of stopping a route to do, you got to have either a handyman or you've got to have a person that does exclusion. A lot of guys don't want to get into it, but I think exclusion work in certain parts of the country, there's a lot of big money to be made in exclusion work to solve those problems.
I think there's a lot of big money to be made in exclusion in all parts of the country. I mean, I think one of the big changes with exclusion in the industry that's come about in the last 2 to 3 years is a lot of people just used to tell the customer, this is what I need you to do so that I can do my job better. And everyone just said, okay, hopefully the customer does it. 90% of the time the customer wouldn't have time or wouldn't have the will to do the work.
Right.
And then obviously they're getting blamed for the rodent problem not going away. Well, if the customer had just done the exclusion that was asked, everything would have been fine. And I think the industry is starting to change in that people go, well, maybe we shouldn't be expecting this of our customers. Maybe it's time that we said, right, let's charge for this. Let's actually do the work right. It's going to make us more effective as pest control operators, and let's make some extra money doing it at the same time.
Yeah, no, and I, even with customers that I tell, you just need to find a handyman or a contractor that can do this work. And what we find is that they're not understanding that why is even the contractors, it's not a big deal. You know, a rat can't get through there. It's too small. They don't understand the rodent biology. So contractors, what I find is that they don't understand any of the insect or rodent biology, and they're just, if you're a roofer, it's just, well, water's never going to get in through there, whatever. So the weathering and the sealing and all that is done mostly from a weather perspective, not from an animal perspective. They don't have the understanding of animal biology to solve those problems. And so I agree that I've seen that hundreds of times, where the contractor doesn't get it, the client doesn't get it. And even if they do the job, it's half what they should have done, or if it's done incorrectly, a rodent can still get in through there. And I have, hundreds of pictures on that. So yeah, I think that exclusion is going to be, I think it's going to be another subcategory going forward, we'll have probably the Exclusion Society of America, or something like that. I
don't know if it'll go that far, but it has, some of the more progressive companies out there in the country I've seen now have guys who are exclusion specialists. I mean, that is what they do. Now, generally, it's companies obviously with 10 plus trucks, because that allows them the flexibility to do something like that. But they've obviously identified a need that they can also make a lot of money on, and so they're having a guy who's doing the work right each time. And I think you're right. Part of the problem is, even some companies out there, they don't have and I understand, sometimes you just don't have the time to do an hour's worth of exclusion, even the customer's willing to pay for it. So people will get contractors to do it, but again, these are not guys who are used to dealing with pests. I mean, I've talked to contractors who did very beautiful work and were amazed that a rodent still got in there. And then you go, well, size holes were you plugging? So, well, anything the size, I figured a rat's about the size of my hand, so I kind of said, any hole that's as big as, or almost as big as my fist, smaller than that they won't fit into. And I'm going, you realize a rat fit into a hole the size of a quarter, because all you have to do is get his skull through. And he goes, well, how's that possible? I've never been told that.
Right. Yeah,
again,
I get that all the time.
We're not professionals, so we have the knowledge and we're not using it to make money, which in the end is why we're in the business, right? I mean, we may love what we do, but in the end, the goal is to make money, so...
Yeah. And
we should use our knowledge to do it.
And solve the problem, for our client. I mean, if we solve an issue, take away a pain point, fill a need, somebody's willing to pay for it. It's just finding that, getting that little niche. And, hey, some guys are, that were handyman. And if they get the rodent biology, this might be a new career for them, just to go out and do exclusion work. And that's it. And they subcontract. You can even subcontract the exclusion work that you don't want to do to somebody that's all they do. So I think that, there's a big need in it. It's one of the things that I'm very handy that I would probably enjoy doing, but I just can't get into any more things that I do. I have to hire people we're in a growth stage right now. We're trying to get people hired. Our main focus now is to get darn good at HR. That's our next challenge. That's right now my next goal for the next year is to get really darn good at HR and figure out how we're going to hire the people that we need, because we're growing and I can't, I don't have any more hours and I'm not getting any younger. So that's been it. Andre, anything that you want to add, my friend, that I haven't asked you, if people want to get a hold of you guys, what's the best way to do it? Tell me.
Well, if they want to get a hold of us, if they need, if they need some samples of our rodenticides or the Rodent Stop or more information, obviously the website's the first place to go. It's Pelgar-USA.com. we do have all those videos on the website as well as our rodenticides in action videos. I have to say, not proper placement of the rodenticides, because you can't put a camera inside a bait station very well. But it is rodenticides being used, and it's quite an interesting video as well. But yeah, our contact info is up there. Any of our reps or myself, feel free to give the office a call. Any questions we can answer, any samples we can send. So we're not a big player in the industry, but we feel like we've got some fairly unique products. I know we're the only ones using the lard in our soft bait. I know we're one of the few companies out there making a cast wax block, which is really great for high heat and high moisture areas like southern Florida. I don't know if you've tried our blocks out there in Miami, but they've done really well out there for that reason. And then obviously the Rodent Stop is going to be a great new product, good way to expand that business base.
No, I agree. It's going to be. I'm gonna give your products a shot, because honestly, it just hasn't been one of the the top 5 names that pop up on our list of companies that we use. I mean, we just go with whatever mostly is getting promoted in the distributors, and that whatever's outside or whatever. I had no real information about your company till now, so I'm glad.
I mean, as great as the distributors have been for the industry, one of the things you do have to remember is that it is generally a pay-to-play kind of area. So
yeah. No, I agree.
The products are being promoted because someone's paid for them to be promoted, and unfortunately, smaller manufacturers like us, a lot of times, it's more word of mouth.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, you've got thousands of words of mouth right now. So you
I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, no, I really have enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed your time. Thank you so much for coming on, for being part of the podcast. And, in the future, if you ever want to come back, you got a new product, you want to talk about something different, you're welcome to come back.
Anytime, even if you just want to talk about where the industry's going. I obviously get around to a lot of areas. I've got some interesting experience and opinions, and I like to talk about.
Yeah, no, I'd be more than glad. I'm sure our audience, the neat thing about us is that we're just a bunch of geeks that want to know stuff, and we do stuff and make things happen. So the audiences are really unique, and they enjoy that kind of stuff. So I hope they really enjoyed today's podcast, because I did.
Yeah, I'm kind of in that same boat. I'm a geek. I like trying new things too, and talking to other people like that gives you interesting ideas. We had one a couple of years back about putting slug bait in the rodenticides. Killed the slugs, but it became unpalatable to rodents. And you'd never have figured that out if someone didn't say, "Hey, have you ever tried this?"
Right. Which that's great, because I'm glad you brought that up. We got slugs down here like you would not believe, in snails, mostly snails. And I'm thinking about just carrying a salt grinder with me somehow, and just, putting salt inside the stations, because sometimes I'll go in and there's like 50 of them in there. I'll give you a smarter solution that I picked up in the Pacific Northwest, talking about this with those guys up there, because they have slugs year round. I mean, obviously they've got so much water. Yeah,
it's not shocking, but a lot of guys up there buy the rock salt from Home Depot that goes on sale after every winter for $5 for a 50-pound bag, and they carry that in their truck, and they put a handful of rock salt in every bait station, and never ever have an issue with slugs again.
There you go. So rock salt inside the station. I'm gonna have to try, because that was what I was thinking. I said salt is
or on the outside, on the perimeter of the station, that'll work as well.
Yeah. It just you get a lot of rain and see how long it lasts. But I mean that's a great tip, to put rock salt in. Solves that problem around it, because I mean we just get inundated. Like right now we're getting, every time I open up a station, there's like 20-30 of them in there, with as much rain as we're getting this season. We started early this year, so. Everything is going haywire right now. We're getting all kinds of calls on weird stuff.
Well, yeah, so. and they're eating your bait, and it's not really doing a lot to them. And at the same time, it's probably keeping the rodents out. So it's now an ineffective station, which really stinks from a monetary as well as a control point of view.
Yeah, no. So that definitely we're going to have to do that. Well, I appreciate the time, appreciate the call.
That was a great conversation, Frank. Appreciate the call. Thanks.
All right, man. You have a great one. I'll talk to you soon.
You too. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Until next time, have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Until next time, have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.